Just 1 minute ago, a revelation detonated at the heart of the monarchy. A quiet prince, long underestimated, often overlooked, stepped forward and shattered centuries of royal certainty. What he revealed was not rumor, not speculation, but a final wish, a sealed desire, a royal instruction that, if honored, could upend the very line of succession itself. And now the question, echoing through palace corridors, is chilling. Why did Prince Edward wait until now? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was meant to be an ordinary strategy session, the kind where protocol guides every word and hierarchy determines who speaks and who listens. Senior royals had gathered behind closed doors to discuss the institution's future in careful, measured tones. Nothing dramatic, nothing unpredictable, and certainly nothing revolutionary. Then Prince Edward rose, not abruptly, not angrily, but with a steadiness that felt almost rehearsed, as though he had been carrying something heavy for years and had finally decided he could no longer bear it alone. The room shifted, conversations halted, the air tightened. This was not a casual interjection, it was a declaration. His voice, those present would later whisper, did not tremble. It carried weight, not the weight of ambition, nor resentment, but of duty, something deeply personal. He made it clear from the very first sentence that this was not about power or position. It was about a promise, a final promise made to his father, Prince Philip. Edward did not dress his words in elaborate phrasing. He spoke plainly, almost starkly, saying he could no longer remain silent about what Philip had asked of him in the final chapter of his life. And when he uttered the phrase, bypass traditional succession, the effect was immediate and electric. Some stared at him in disbelief. Others reportedly went pale. Aides who had been taking notes lowered their pens mid-sentence. One senior advisor quietly stepped out of the room, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Because succession is not merely a family matter, it is the spine of the monarchy. To suggest altering it even in principle is to touch the most sacred nerve of the crown. Yet Edward continued, insisting that his father's wish was not impulsive, not emotional, but deliberate and considered. He referenced a document, not displayed, not circulated, but acknowledged. A written expression of concern and direction, crafted in Philip's final years. The tension that followed was not loud, it was controlled, brittle, and far more dangerous because of it. Loyalty to the reigning order clashed with loyalty to a patriarch whose influence had shaped generations. Was honoring Philip an act of devotion or an act of destabilization? Eyes turned toward those directly affected, and though no names were spoken, everyone understood the implication. If tradition could be questioned once, it could be questioned again, and in that fragile silence, unity began to feel less like certainty and more like performance. Edward did not demand immediate action. He did not call for votes or reforms. He simply placed the truth is truth at the center of the table and refused to take it back. And as murmurs rippled outward from that private chamber into the wider palace network, one thing became painfully clear. This was no longer containable. The monarchy, built on continuity and order, was now confronting an internal tremor born from within its own bloodline. And yet, as stunned as the room remained, Edward's revelation was only the beginning, because what Philip allegedly requested was far more radical than anyone imagined. For decades, Prince Philip stood beside the throne, steady, disciplined, loyal. Yet behind palace doors, there were whispers, moments of frustration, private conversations where tradition itself was questioned. What if the Duke of Edinburgh, the monarchy's most disciplined defender, quietly harboured doubts about how the crown would survive the future? And what if those doubts evolved into a final instruction that could forever alter royal destiny? He understood the machinery of monarchy better than most. He had studied it, protected it, defended it against criticism and chaos. But understanding something so intimately also reveals its weaknesses. As years passed and the world outside the palace walls accelerated into a new era of transparency and accountability, Philip reportedly became increasingly aware that the institution he had sworn to protect was walking a tightrope between reverence and irrelevance. He did not fear change. He feared stagnation, and in private moments, that fear sharpened into something more urgent. Those close to him described conversations where his tone shifted from loyalty to calculation. He would reportedly question whether rigid adherence to birth order truly guaranteed the strongest future leadership, not out of rebellion, not out of favoritism, but out of strategic realism. The monarchy, he believed, could not rely solely on heritage, while the world demanded performance. Stability was no longer enough. Resilience was essential. And resilience required strength of character, discipline under pressure, and an instinct for modern engagement that could not simply be inherited at birth. Within the royal structure, such thoughts were delicate, almost dangerous. Tradition is the glue that binds the crown together. To question it, even hypothetically, risks unsettling centuries of certainty. Yet Philip had witnessed storms that tested the institution's foundation, public crises that exposed vulnerability, moments when personal weakness threatened public confidence. In those seasons of strain, he reportedly assessed each family member not by their titles, but by their ability to endure scrutiny without fracture. By their ability to endure scrutiny without fracture, by their willingness to carry responsibility without complaint. There were subtle signals of where his confidence rested. Quiet admiration expressed in private, encouragement offered behind closed doors, not declarations but indicators. And as his health declined, the emotional weight of these observations intensified. Time, once abundant, became precious. Reflection deepened into urgency. Conversations with Edward reportedly grew more candid, stripped of ceremony, and layered with paternal honesty. Philip is said to have spoken of the crown not as a symbol, but as a fragile ecosystem that required strategic guardianship. For Edward, those exchanges were not abstract dates. They were confessions, a father grappling with the future of the institution he had sacrificed his own identity to serve. Philip allegedly emphasized that succession should not merely follow chronology, but competence. That strength should guide continuity. It was a radical thought wrapped in careful language, yet its implications were unmistakable. If capability outweighed birth order, then the line itself was no longer untouchable. As Philip's final years drew to a close, the seed of this idea did not fade. It solidified. It lingered in Edward's memory, heavy and unresolved. And if Philip truly believed merit should outweigh tradition, then the next revelation would ignite the most dangerous royal conflict in generations. It happened in private. No cameras, no aides, no protocol officers. Just a father and a son in what would become one of their final meaningful exchanges. According to Edward, Philip spoke without restraint. That night, less duke, more father. Hat was said in that room was never meant for public ears. Yet now, that whispered conversation could redraw the entire royal future. Edward describes the moment not as dramatic, but heavy. The kind of silence that lingers before words that cannot be taken back. Philip, weakened yet mentally sharp, reportedly dismissed formalities. Titles no longer mattered. Rank no longer mattered. What mattered, he allegedly told his son, was survival. Not survival of individuals, but of the institution itself. His voice, Edward claims, carried urgency beneath its calm. It was the urgency of a man who had spent a lifetime observing patterns, studying strengths, identifying cracks long before others dared to acknowledge them. Philip is said to have admitted something rarely spoken aloud: fear. Not fear of scandal or headlines, but fear of slow erosion. He worried that without decisive evolution, the monarchy could drift into ceremonial irrelevance. In that private exchange, he reportedly questioned whether the next in line would possess the strategic endurance required for the storms ahead. The words were not accusatory, they were analytical, yet their implication was explosive. If the designated guardian of the crown was not the strongest defender, then what future awaited the throne? Edward insists a name was never clearly declared, no direct endorsement, no public rejection, but within the pauses, within the careful phrasing, there was meaning. A figure was implied, someone Philip believed had demonstrated discipline under pressure, someone who embodied resilience rather than entitlement. The absence of a spoken name only intensified the gravity, because sometimes what remains unsaid carries more power than explicit instruction. At one point, Edward recalls Philip leaning forward, emphasizing a single principle: Protect the institution, not the title. That sentence, simple yet profound, reportedly became the heart of their exchange. It was not a call for rebellion, it was a plea for stewardship, for discernment, for courage. Philip did not ask his son to create chaos. He asked him to ensure the monarchy did not weaken under blind adherence to custom. And for Edward, that request landed like a burden he never anticipated carrying. Revealing this conversation now tears at him. He knows it was private, sacred, spoken in vulnerability, yet he also believes silence could be a greater betrayal. The conflict is palpable between filial loyalty and institutional responsibility. Was he protecting his father's legacy by speaking out or shattering it? Those who question his timing see ambition. Those who defend him see conscience. But Edward maintains that what he heard that night was not merely reflection, it was instruction. Because, according to him, Philip did not rely solely on spoken words. There was an indication, subtle but deliberate, that his thoughts had been formalized, preserved, perhaps secured. And that suggestion transformed a private confession into something far more consequential. But words alone weren't enough, because Edward claims there was something else, something written, buried within royal archives, protected by silence and sealed authority. Edward alleges there exists a document bearing Philip's final strategic vision, not a formal legal decree, not a public proclamation, but a moral directive, a blueprint for survival. And if authentic, its contents could fracture the centuries-old chain of succession. The palace denies its relevance, but insiders say the document is very real. According to Edward, this was never meant to override constitutional law. It was not drafted as a binding instrument of state. Instead, he describes it as something more subtle and, in many ways, more powerful, a memorandum of intent, a written reflection shaped by decades of proximity to power. Philip allegedly used precise language, framing his concerns not as criticism of individuals, but as an assessment of structural fragility. At its core, Edward claims, the document centers on one phrase repeated more than once: institutional survival. That phrase alone shifts the conversation. Survival implies threat, it implies vulnerability, it implies that what appears stable may in fact be standing on uncertain ground. Within the memorandum, Philip is said to have outlined the risks of automatic inheritance without strategic oversight. He reportedly proposed a recalibration, not the abolition of succession, but its reinforcement through a council model, a small advisory body drawn from senior royals with proven resilience, tasked with guiding and, if necessary, counterbalancing the heir's decisions during transition periods. The implications are staggering, because such a structure would quietly redistribute influence. The crown would remain where tradition places it, but the power orbiting it would shift, and in that shift lies the controversy. Edward suggests Philip believed leadership should be strengthened by those who had demonstrated discipline under scrutiny, not merely by virtue of position. There are whispers that the document references elevating a particular figure into heightened strategic authority, not as monarch, but a stabilizing force behind the throne. Legally, the memorandum may hold no binding weight. Constitutionally, succession remains defined. But morality is a different battlefield. Does the dying wish of a patriarch who devoted his life to safeguarding the monarchy carry persuasive authority? Or does honoring it risk destabilizing the very continuity he sought to protect? Within palace corridors, that question has split loyalties. Some argue tradition must remain untouchable. Others quietly admit that ignoring Philip's concerns could appear dismissive of his lifelong stewardship. The danger extends beyond internal tension. Public revelation of such a document could ignite backlash. Citizens who value clarity may view any perceived manipulation of succession as betrayal. Critics of the monarchy could seize upon the discord as evidence of fragility. Edward understands this risk. He has been warned, urged to remain silent, advised that discretion preserves stability, yet he insists that burying his father's words would dishonor everything Philip stood for. For Edward, this is not about rewriting law, it is about confronting reality. He believes the document forces a necessary conversation, one long avoided. But once the existence of such a memorandum became impossible to dismiss, Whispers escaped the archives and reached the family itself, and once whispers of the document leaked, the reactions from within the family were immediate and explosive. Behind polished smiles and public composure, the monarchy is trembling, because if Philip's final wish truly challenged traditional succession, then someone standing in line is now standing on unstable ground. Loyalty to bloodline clashes with loyalty to vision, and as tensions rise, alliances shift. One thing is certain, this is no longer a quiet family matter, it's a battle for the crown's future. What began as a contained disclosure inside a private chamber quickly transformed into a fault line running through the heart of the royal household. Senior figures who had long relied on order and predictability suddenly found themselves navigating uncertainty. Some reacted with disbelief, dismissing Edward's claims as emotional interpretation rather than institutional threat. Others saw the danger immediately. If even the suggestion of bypassing automatic succession reached the public sphere, confidence in continuity could fracture overnight. Stability is the monarchy's currency, and now that currency felt exposed. The emotional undercurrent was impossible to ignore. For those closest to the current line of inheritance, the revelation felt personal, not theoretical, personal. A quiet questioning of legislative, even if Edward insisted that no individual was being condemned. Anger simmered beneath carefully chosen words. There were accusations of recklessness, of timing, of betrayal. How could Edward reveal such sensitive material without considering the ripple effects? Yet Edward stood firm, repeating that silence would have been the true betrayal of a father's final plea. Younger members of the family reportedly reacted with complexity rather than outrage. Some expressed sympathy for Philip's concerns about modernization and resilience. Others feared the conversation itself, aware that even discussing alternative structures could be weaponized by critics of the institution. Private conversations grew tense. Old loyalties were tested. Those who valued tradition above all urged caution. Those who feared stagnation whispered that perhaps Philip had been right to question inherited certainty. Advisors moved swiftly, emphasizing containment. Narrative control became urgent. Public statements were drafted, redrafted, and carefully filtered. The priority was clear: prevent speculation from overtaking authority. The monarchy has survived centuries precisely because it projects unity, even in times of private strain. But unity cannot be manufactured indefinitely when doubt has entered the bloodstream. And this doubt was not external. It originated from within, from the patriarch whose lifetime of service commanded respect. Edward, meanwhile, found himself redefined in real time. To some, he was courageous, finally voicing what others feared to articulate. To others, he was dangerously naive, destabilizing an institution in the name of principle. The duality was stark. Hero to some, disruptor to others. Yet he did not retract his claims. He did not soften his language. He framed the conversation as necessary evolution, not insurrection. The strain became visible in subtle shifts. Altered tones during public engagements, restrained interactions behind closed doors, carefully managed appearances that could not entirely conceal the undercurrent of tension. The monarchy's strength has always rested on perception of seamless continuity. Now, that continuity felt questioned, not dismantled, but scrutinized. And scrutiny, once invited, rarely retreats quietly. As the internal divide widened, one question began to surface repeatedly in hushed discussions and strategic briefings alike. Because if Philip had envisioned a recalibration of influence, if he had believed strength should guide the future more than chronology, then speculation would not remain abstract forever. It would focus, it would search for a figure. And beneath the conflict lies a deeper question: who exactly did Philip believe should guide the monarchy forward? Philip never publicly endorsed a successor beyond protocol. But according to Edward, there was someone he trusted implicitly, someone he believed embodied resilience, discipline, and strategic clarity. A figure quietly prepared for responsibility beyond their official rank. The identity remains officially unconfirmed, but palace insiders say the implications are unmistakable, and the name alone could ignite another royal storm. In private reflections shared only with a select few, Philip is said to have spoken with unmistakable respect about this individual's steadiness under pressure. Not charm, not popularity. Steadiness, the kind that does not fracture when headlines turn hostile or when responsibility grows hair. Vi Edward suggests that his father admired a rare combination of restraint and resolve, someone who listened more than they spoke, who absorbed criticism without retaliation, who understood that leadership within a monarchy requires patience measured in decades, not days. These were not casual compliments. They were assessments. The emphasis, Edward insists, was always on capability. Philip reportedly argued that inheritance may determine position, but it does not guarantee preparation. He believed strength must be tested, not assumed. That conviction, nurtured quietly over years, shaped his evolving vision of how the monarchy should navigate the future. There are murmurs of long conversations behind closed doors, conversations framed not as grooming, but as guidance. Subtle mentorship, strategic insight shared without fanfare. Nothing overt, nothing declarative, yet meaningful enough to leave an imprint. The emotional complexity of this possibility cannot be overstated. To elevate someone beyond their traditional place in the hierarchy is to challenge a structure built on clarity. It invites suspicion, it stirs resentment. Even the suggestion unsettles those who stand firmly within the established order. Because if Philip saw greater fortitude in someone positioned outside automatic succession, then the hierarchy becomes less about certainty and more about evaluation, and evaluation breeds anxiety. Outside palace walls, speculation accelerates. Analysts dissect body language. Commentators scrutinize past interactions. Media outlets craft narratives at lightning speed, each attempting to guess the unnamed figure. Social platforms ignite with debate. Some praise the idea of merit over birthright. Others condemn what they perceive as destabilizing ambition. The frenzy feeds itself, expanding beyond internal deliberation into public discourse that the monarchy cannot easily control. Yet the greatest tension remains within. The reigning structure depends on unwavering confidence in its continuity. To imply alternative guardianship risks appearing disloyal to those currently entrusted with authority. Advisors caution restraint. They warn that even indirect confirmation could fracture trust irreparably. But Edward maintains a delicate balance. He does not confirm the identity. He does not deny it. His silence becomes its own statement, fueling curiosity while protecting specifics. In interviews and private discussions, he repeats that the conversation was never about replacing a monarch. It was about safeguarding the institution's strength. But words, once released, acquire their own momentum. And as speculation spirals, Edward makes a decision that pushes this crisis beyond containment. For years, Edward remained the quiet son, the steady presence, the least controversial royal. So why risk everything now? According to those closest to him, this was never about ambition. It was about conscience, about carrying the weight of a father's final trust. And when silence began to feel like betrayal, Edward chose disclosure, fully aware it might cost him everything. He did not step into this storm lightly. Those who know him describe months of hesitation, restless nights and conversations that circled the same agonizing question: speak or protect the peace. Edward understood the magnitude of what he was holding. Philip's words were not casual reflections. They were intimate, vulnerable, and delivered in confidence. To reveal them would fracture that privacy forever. Yet to bury them, he feared, would distort his father's legacy into something smaller than it was meant to be. Family pressure intensified as rumors spread. Senior figures urged restraint, emphasizing that stability depends on unity, and unity depends on discretion. Some framed his intention as dangerously impulsive. Others warned that even raising questions about succession would hand critics ammunition. Edward listened. He absorbed the warnings, but beneath the counsel of caution was a deeper anxiety and unspoken acknowledgement that the conversation Philip began could not be entirely dismissed. The fear of being branded a destabilizer weighed heavily on him. He had spent years cultivating a reputation for reliability, for measured contribution rather than headline-making declarations. To shatter that image now seemed almost self-destructive, but Edward reportedly began to see the greater danger in silence. If the monarchy prided itself on strength, then strength must include the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. To him, honesty was not rebellion, it was reinforcement. The emotional burden became personal. Protecting legacy meant honoring Philip's devotion to the crown, not shielding fragile perceptions. Tradition demanded loyalty to structure. Conscience demanded loyalty to principle. Those two loyalties collided within him, creating an internal conflict as intense as the external one unfolding across palace corridors. In private meetings, voices reportedly rose. Accusations surfaced. Some questioned his judgment. Others questioned his timing. Edward did not retreat. There was a pivotal confrontation, quiet but firm, where he reportedly told senior family members that preserving harmony at the expense of integrity would corrode the institution more deeply than any temporary controversy. The words were not delivered in anger. They were deliberate, measured, and final. Because once he chose to speak publicly, there would be no reversal, no subtle withdrawal. The act of disclosure was irreversible. As his statement circulated and reactions multiplied, Edward's position solidified. He was no longer the quiet son. He was the catalyst, the moaner. Rachier now stood at a crossroads it could not ignore. Conversations that once happened behind closed doors were being dissected in public discourse. Advisors recalibrated strategies, loyalties clarified. The reckoning Philip may have anticipated was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding in real time. Yet even amid confrontation and uncertainty, Edward insisted that his father never intended chaos. The goal was not upheaval but endurance. And that distinction matters, because if Philip's vision centered on safeguarding the institution, rather than dismantling it, then the solution might not lie in rewriting laws or rewriting history. But even as Edward speaks, one final twist remains, because honoring Philip's wish may not require rewriting law, only redefining power. What if bypassing traditional succession doesn't mean overthrowing a monarch, but reshaping influence? What if Philip's final wish was less about dethroning and more about redistributing power behind the throne? The idea is radical, subtle, dangerous, and brilliant, because sometimes the crown remains the same, but the hands guiding it shift, and that possibility may be the most explosive revelation of all. As the shockwaves from Edward's disclosure continue to ripple outward, a new interpretation begins to take shape, one that reframes the entire crisis. Perhaps this was never about removing anyone from their rightful place. Perhaps it was about reinforcing the structure in a way that ensures its survival. Influence and title are not the same. A crown can rest on one head while counsel, strategy, and momentum are quietly shaped by others. That distinction, though subtle, carries enormous consequences. Philip, according to Edward, understood that modern monarchy is no longer sustained by symbolism alone. It requires strategic agility. It demands collaboration. The world is louder, faster, more scrutinizing the first than ever before. In that environment, a solitary figure cannot shoulder every expectation without risk. The concept of a succession council, an advisory circle composed of those who have demonstrated resilience, emerges not as rebellion, but as reinforcement, a safeguard, a stabilizing mechanism designed to protect the institution during transitional seasons. Such restructuring would not rewrite constitutional law. It would not dissolve the established order. Instead, it would introduce a calibrated redistribution of authority behind the scenes. The heir would remain heir, the monarch would remain monarch, but strategic influence could be shared, tempered, strengthened. To some, this sounds like dilution. To others, it sounds like evolution. And therein lies the tension balancing stability with the necessity of adaptation. Emotionally, the implications are profound. For those traditionally positioned as next, even a suggestion of shared influence can feel like erosion of confidence. It challenges assumptions. It invites introspection. But Philip's alleged vision was not about undermining anyone's legitimacy. It was about protecting the crown from becoming overly dependent on a single axis of leadership. Strength, in his view, was collective when properly harnessed. The monarchy now stands at a crossroads. One path clings tightly to established sequence, insisting that any deviation invites chaos. The other considers a recalibrated framework that maintains outward continuity while strengthening internal foundations. Neither path is simple. Both carry risk, but ignoring the conversation altogether may be the greatest gamble of all. Edward's final public statement reflects this careful recalibration, measured, calm, unwavering. He emphasizes that his father never sought to ignite division. He sought endurance. He clarifies that honoring Philip's wish does not require dismantling what exists, only refining it. His tone carries both resolve and restraint. He does not call for immediate action. He calls for reflection, for courage. For willingness to ask whether the institution can be fortified without fracturing its heritage. And as debate intensifies within palace walls and beyond, the true magnitude of this moment becomes clear. This is not merely about succession. It is about stewardship, about whether tradition can coexist with strategic modernization, about whether loyalty to legacy means freezing it in time or strengthening it for generations yet to come. Because if Philip's final wish was never about replacing a king, but protecting a legacy, then the real question is not who wears the crown, but who truly shapes its future from this moment forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.